Today, we're cracking open the Talmud to unravel a truly fascinating legal case about the power of your intention.
It's a question we've all probably asked ourselves at some point, right? What if you go through all the right motions, you do the perfect action, but deep down your heart and mind are totally somewhere else? Which one matters more, the action or the intent behind it?
Well, for the ancient sages, this wasn't just some late-night dorm room philosophy. It was a critical, high-stakes legal puzzle right at the heart of the sacrificial rituals in the temple. And honestly, their journey to solve it is like an incredible detective story, packed with clues, red herrings, and a final breakthrough that is just wow.
So, our story kicks off with the central mystery, the case of wrong intent. Now, before they could even think about solving the case, the sages did what all great detectives do. They defined the problem with incredible precision. They realized wrong intent wasn't just one vague idea. It was actually two very distinct ways things could go wrong.
Let's break this down. First, you've got wrong purpose. Imagine you're bringing an animal for a specific reason, say to atone for a sin, making it a sin offering. But while the ritual is happening, you're thinking of it as a completely different type, like a burnt offering. The action's right, but the purpose in your head is wrong. Then there's wrong person. This one's a bit more straightforward. You're offering the correct sacrifice for, let's say, Sarah, but you're actually thinking it's for David. Getting these two straight was absolutely key.
Okay, so with the problem clearly defined, the hunt for evidence was on. The sages turned to the one place they knew had the answers, the biblical text.
And they zeroed in on three crucial moments in the ritual: the slaughter of the animal, the collection of its blood, and finally the sprinkling of that blood on the altar. They figured a mistaken intent at any one of these points could potentially throw the whole thing off.
Their first piece of evidence pops up in the book of Leviticus. The verse says, "And the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering." Now the sages, they really zoomed in on those last two words.
And here was their logic. Look, the text doesn't just say, take the blood. It specifically says, the blood of the sin offering. Aha! So they argued the action itself, collecting the blood, has to be done with the explicit thought, the intention that this is for a sin offering. This was proof positive that wrong purpose really mattered.
And then the very next verse seemed to hand them another huge clue. And the priest shall make atonement for him concerning his sin. This one seemed to cover all the bases.
Here's how they saw it. The phrase, his sin, points directly to the purpose. It has to be for a sin. And the phrase for him points to the correct person. I mean, this looked like the smoking gun. It proved that both purpose and person had to be correct for that final crucial step of the sprinkling. Case closed, right? Easy?
Well, this is where our detective story takes a really sharp turn. Because just when the sages thought they had it all figured out, their best pieces of evidence started to completely fall apart under questioning.
This forced them to ask a much, much harder question. Okay, so we know correct intent is the ideal way to do it. But is it just, best practice? Or is it an absolute, non-negotiable deal breaker? If your intent is off, is the entire sacrifice worthless? They needed to find a source that spelled out the consequences.
So they started testing other, more specific cases. They looked at the offering of a Nazirite. The verse there says his sin offering. So they thought maybe that extra word, his, is there to teach us that getting the person wrong is a total deal breaker. But here's the fatal flaw. The exact same verse also says his burnt offering. And for that sacrifice, everyone agreed that intent isn't a deal breaker. So the logic just didn't hold up. It was inconsistent. Next, they looked at a leper's offering. That text also seemed pretty clear that intent was essential, but this was a highly specialized, unique ritual that came with a whole bunch of other sacrifices. The sages basically said, you can't take a rule from this one weird case and apply it to everything else. Both of their best leads went completely cold.
In fact, one of the sages, Ravina, is the one who delivered the final blow to that first theory. He famously objected, asking something like, hey, if you're going to make such a huge deal out of the word his for the sin offering, then what are you going to do with his burnt offering sitting in the exact same sentence? And with that, the argument just collapsed.
So, the investigation had totally stalled out. Their best theories were in shambles. And then, just like in any great detective story, came the breakthrough, from a place they least expected it.
I mean, the case had gone completely cold. All the obvious clues led to dead ends. It was starting to look impossible to prove that wrong intent was a deal breaker, until they stumbled upon a brand new clue.
This was the verse. Now, at first glance, it really just looks like a list, right? This is the law of the burnt offering, and of the sin offering, and of the sacrifice of peace offerings. But by putting all of these different offerings side by side, the sages found the key that unlocked the entire mystery.
Okay, stick with me here, because their solution is a brilliant two-step move. First, they looked at the peace offering mentioned in that list. Now, for a peace offering, it was a known, established rule that while you should have the right intent, messing it up wasn't a deal-breaker. By linking the sin offering to the peace offering in the same list, the sages said, okay, this verse establishes a baseline rule, a gold standard for both of them.
And this is where it all clicked. They asked themselves, if this general verse already gives us that baseline rule, then why do those other more specific verses even exist? You know, the ones that seemed like bad clues before? They realized those clues weren't flawed at all, they had just misunderstood their purpose. Their job was to teach a stricter rule that applies on top of the gold standard. They were there all along to prove that for a sin offering, and only a sin offering, having the correct intent is in fact an absolute ironclad deal-breaker. Case closed.
But the sages weren't done. Like any good scientist, they had to stress test their new theory against one final, really strange outlier, the Passover exception. This brought up one last nagging question. If correct intent is so fundamentally important for certain offerings, are there any exceptions to the rule?
And the Passover sacrifice is just weird. It has this bizarre dual nature. If you offer the Passover lamb at the correct time on Passover Eve, but you have the wrong purpose in mind, it is completely invalid, total deal breaker. But, and get this, if you take that exact same animal and offer it on any other day of the year for the wrong purpose, it's perfectly valid. It just gets reclassified on the spot as a peace offering. So timing completely changes the rules of intent.
So where did they find the justification for that? In one last incredibly precise bit of textual detective work. A verse about peace offerings says, "If his offering is of the flock." The sages asked a simple, brilliant question. What is the one sacrifice that is uniquely and only from the flock? The Passover lamb. This final detail just reveals the insane depth of this legal system. It's so detailed that it accounts not just for its own rules, but for its own exceptions too. It really makes you wonder, what other profound truths are hiding just beneath the surface of these ancient texts?